My name is Rebecca, but my friends call me Becca. This will probably be my only upload. This is a story that, at this time, I know must be told in case something happens to me. I recently moved to a small town in West Virginia where I purchased an old 3-story, 2,500 square foot Victorian Style home for only $30,000. It's a fixer-upper for sure. Thinking back now, I wasn't looking for a place that big. But when I found it on the market, once I laid eyes on it, I knew I would hate myself if I didn't get it. It was a done deal the moment I saw the house. Though it was evident the place needed some renovations, the extra expenses were nothing compared to the thrill of owning such a beautiful and extravagant home. So I signed the papers, got the deed for the house, and moved into a motel in town as I tried to get in touch with the renovation company. Blatantly ignoring the signs before me, I wished I had paid more attention and just paused for a second to see how everything was just so off. How a house as prestigious as that had been on the market for such a long time and at such a measly price. Or how the estate agent was so quick to sell it off, not willing to bargain with my first offer. Or was it how the house was stationed atop the hill of the town, completely isolated from the other houses in the area? And more importantly, the nagging feeling of unease within me when I first set foot on the property, as if something was screaming in my face to leave and never return. But my eyes were blinded by the thrill of owning it, of what my future would look like with all the parties and dinners I could throw. Yes, looking back now, I suppose my greed and pride had blinded my eyes to the obvious signs. But the deed was done, and now I get to tell my story, and hopefully prevent some greedy bastard out there from repeating my mistakes. So, I'll start from the top. I met with my real estate agent, and just as in the online photos, the house was superb. But I'd noticed that day that she was quite shady on a few details concerning the house. Like when I'd asked about the original owners, her reply was vague. She'd gone on about them moving away to some Asian country or something. I knew she was lying. She didn't put any effort in constructing it well enough. But I didn't care. I was too enamored by the artistry of both the architecture and the Victorian style of the home. The marble-tiled floors, the roofing, the stair railings, they all screamed royalty, and I was sold at first glance. She had taken me to the first and second floors, showed me multiple rooms and how much extra space the house had that I knew I didn't need. But it didn't matter. The more the merrier, I'd said with a grin, and she smiled as well, though hers was obviously plastered on. And then I heard a loud sound from downstairs, like something had fallen or toppled over, and I was curious. She acted like it was nothing serious. Her fake smile had extended into a taut grin at the time, stretching her makeup so far that I had to hide my discomfort. Probably some raccoons or squirrels, but it shouldn't bother you. Once you move in, they'll stay away. The clattering sounds occurred a few other times as I inspected more rooms, but I learned to ignore it, attributing it to either squirrels or raccoons that had turned the abandoned home into their playground. I made a mental note at the time to install specific traps around the property. I paid for the house the same day as the inspection, and with Sophie's help, my best friend, I'd gotten in touch with a renovation company and proceeded with the plans for the house's touch-ups. There were so many things that had been damaged over the years, and the underground basement had a distinctive foul odor that was impossible to ignore. I was surprised to discover that the house had a basement when I arrived with the renovation company the following week. The estate lady had failed to mention it, but again, I saw it as a bonus to the deal I'd gotten. I felt so lucky at the time, thinking I'd won the lottery of the year. It's only now I realize why she had failed to mention it. No one was meant to venture down there. It had even been sealed off by a makeshift wooden fence at the time. Although I wondered why, because when I'd eventually gotten the renovation company to break down the barricade and went down there myself, there didn't seem to be any reason to seal off the room. Apart from its awful smell and the damp, musty air, I didn't see any signs for why it had been sealed off. I reasoned at the time that maybe the owners didn't want to make use of it, or maybe it was prone to breeding rodents and pests. But little did I know that the main reason was something physical eyes could not see. The company had begun work immediately, but I was surprised when, after 3 days, they had canceled the contract and said they couldn't finish the work. When I'd inquired why, they were standoffish about the reason, claiming simply that the workers didn't feel safe. I felt that they were probably just lackadaisical. Perhaps the size of the work was more than they bargained for, and they didn't know how to tell me without sounding unprofessional. Whatever their reason, I ignored that sign as well and moved on to the next renovation company I could get my hands on. But it wasn't an easy task. Almost every company in the area had automatically declined once they realized it was the mansion on the hill. I'd learned from the townsfolk that this was the infamous name they'd given my newly bought home. Infamous because they felt it was probably haunted by a ghost, but I thought it was all hogwash. In all the 27 years of my life, I had never encountered a ghost. I believed it to be nothing but superstition and fairy tales. And if they so happened to exist, they definitely wouldn't want to haunt me. I never did anything wrong, and I'd managed to mind my business for most of my life. I often laugh at my past reasoning now. Little did I know what my new home had in store for me. I managed to get another renovation company, but from deep within the city this time, with no prior knowledge of any town rumors. Thankfully, within a few months I'd gotten the place in tip-top shape. Though there were still complaints of some workers quitting mid-job, they were professional enough to pull through to the end. I'd bought the necessary furniture and moved in 2 weeks after the renovations. The company had done a number on the house, to the point where it was hard to recognize at first. It looked like one of the homes in Beverly Hills, and I couldn't wait to show it off. Sophie came by to visit once in a while to keep me company, but she couldn't stay over due to her work in the city. This left me alone most of the time, and slowly, the expected loneliness began to kick in. Yet, the crazy part was not the fact that I was lonely, but that I never felt like I was alone in the house. It always felt like there was someone else around, creeping up behind me, watching me, and following me wherever I went. It was creepy and unsettling, because I knew I didn't have neighbors, and I'd always made sure to lock my doors. Still, it felt like I was sharing the home with someone else. That was the first time I'd paid attention to one of the signs, the recurrent noises on the various floors. I'd noticed them whenever I was home. Sometimes it was clattering sounds. Other times it sounded like footsteps from one of the floors above. But whenever I'd go to check, there would be nothing. I once again thought of the animals around, just like the real estate agent had said. So as I planned, I set up the various animal traps around the vicinity, but they never caught any squirrels or rodents, and it drew my attention to something I hadn't noticed before. Not only were there no pests around, but there weren't even the usual animals as well. Birds, lizards, even the sound of crickets. It was all non-existent, as I realized then that no animal ventured close to the house. I wondered why it had taken me so long to realize this. It made the silence in the house almost deafening. I could hear a pin drop in the attic when I was on the ground floor. That was how quiet the entire place had been, which was why I became so bothered when I would hear those slight sounds that plagued the house from time to time. It was too real for my ears to be playing tricks on me. Sometimes I'd be in the bathroom on the first floor. Then it would sound like voices coming from across the hallway or down the stairs, almost like people whispering to each other. And then I would feel this chill in the air that I was sure was not from the weather. After all, it was summertime in August, and the days were warmer than usual. Other times, there would be strange sounds coming from the basement, almost like somebody was walking around down there, doing something to try and get my attention. But I was scared of going down there. No matter how many times I'd hired a cleaning agency to scrub and clean the place up, the putrid odor would return after a few days. Even when I'd gotten a vent installed, thinking all it needed was good ventilation, I couldn't get rid of the foul smell. It wasn't only the sounds and the awful smell from the basement that creeped me out. There was just this bad feeling about the area. Despite the renovation, the basement was the only section of the house that I dreaded nearing. With all the things going on in the house, I started thinking I was going crazy. But it was after an episode one night that I realized it wasn't only me. I'd gone downstairs for a drink past midnight when I'd heard loud footsteps from the first floor above and more distant ones coming from the second. It lasted for almost 5 whole minutes. It was at that moment that I realized there was definitely something wrong with the house. The second sign I'd experienced to substantiate my claim was a particularly annoying one: the recurring displacement of my household items. This started off as me clearly thinking I was being forgetful, like the time I placed the TV remote on the sofa, took a stroll to grab something from the kitchen, and by the time I was back, the remote had magically disappeared and reappeared in my bedroom on the first floor. Or other times when my makeup would vanish into thin air, and no matter how much I searched, it was nowhere to be seen. I thought it strange and absurd that my things would either go missing or move from where I kept them, especially since it was only me living in the house. I told Sophie about it, and she laughed it off, blaming it on my forgetful nature, and teased me about it. I'd laughed along with her at the time, never bringing it up again to avoid coming off as crazy. But I knew deep down that it wasn't just me. And then the final sign to crown it all, what made me believe the rumors of the haunted mansion on the hill were the insidious nightmares. It started the second week after I moved in. The strange dreams of a family that lived in my new home. All 10 of them, always coming out from the basement and running all over the place. Most of them were kids, while the others were adults. But I never got to see their faces. I would always be forced to stand and watch as they ran around my home, unable to do anything, till I woke up all sweaty and tired. It made me so concerned that I had to Google the Victorian home I'd just bought, wondering if indeed my house was haunted and I'd just purchased my death sentence. But there were no results. Nothing came up. It was like the house didn't even exist. This discovery was so puzzling that I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, and tried as much as possible to ignore the sounds of the footsteps that were nearly driving me insane. They were all over the place, running loudly against the halls and talking in incoherent words as they teased me, as if reminding me that it was not my home, but theirs. That I was the unwelcome guest, and they would make my life in the house a living hell. Unable to take it anymore, I grabbed my car keys and drove all the way to Sophie's place in the city. For the first time in 2 weeks, I had a good night's rest. It felt like I'd awoken as a new person the next day. I hadn't realized that the negative energy in the house had drained me to that point. So in my pursuit of needing a break, or just somewhere I could clear my head, I called for a mini getaway vacation with Sophie and a few of our friends. I needed to just go somewhere different, away from my new weird home and away from West Virginia. They had come up with the idea of a resort somewhere in Australia, and I was all for it. We booked our flights, and because the girls could see that I was in a hurry, we scheduled it for the weekend. I slept at Sophie's place until I had to pack up for our trip. I was surprised to return to a quiet house, with no strange sounds in either the basement or the other floors. I wondered if it had all been my imagination from the start, and began feeling guilty for pressuring my friends into an impromptu vacation. But it didn't matter. I knew I still needed the break. I slept without nightmares that night, and also, shockingly, none of my items had gone missing or been moved. I found it all eerie, but what chilled me to my core was when I stepped out that morning to find that all of the tires on my car were flattened. It looked like someone, or something, had punctured each of them with a sharp object. I glanced at the time, knowing I would not have enough time to call a mechanic, so I booked an Uber ride to take me to the airport. The thought of missing my flight and staying at the house was unimaginable. I managed to get one after a few declines and headed straight for the airport. The driver was engaging me in small talk when I told him about my flat tires. My blood ran cold when he mentioned the dark haze that seemed to hover over my new home, and how he always got a strange vibe whenever he drove close by. He went on about how the rumors of the house being haunted were not just rumors, but based on the story of the Jenkins family that had died mysteriously in the basement. He went on to commend my bravery, telling me how no one wanted to stay in the home after what happened to the Asian family that lived there right before I moved in. "What happened to the family?" I asked, noticeably shaking in the back seat. They had gone on a trip to rest for a while. At least, that was how they put it. But that was the last we ever saw of them. They never came back, and no one knows what happened to them either. I remember being so terrified by what he'd said that I couldn't say another word after that. I wondered if that would happen to me as well, but I pushed it out of my mind, not saying a word till I met with Sophie and one of the girls at the airport. We boarded, and I'd gotten the window seat right next to Sophie. Being so exhausted from everything, I didn't know when I'd fallen asleep. I guess I was expecting a sound dream, just like when I'd been sleeping at Sophie's. But it was just like the other nightmares I had back in the house. I was back in the house, and I heard a multitude of footsteps running along the halls. But this time, it was a bit different. This nightmare was unique from the others. Instead of just the figures of kids and adults running around, this time, I was finally able to get a look at their faces. And I gasped when I finally saw the faces of the 10 people that had been plaguing my dreams endlessly. 7 of them looked like an American family, and I guess they were the Jenkins household, while the other 3 were Asian. Before I could process fully what this meant, I noticed I was unable to move. I was forced to watch as the 10 of them closed in on me, surrounding me from every corner before dragging me towards the basement with the awful smell. And I screamed till I jolted awake from the nightmare. Sophie stared at me like she just bore witness to the nightmare I'd escaped. "Becca, are you all right? You were moving so strangely and muttering something in your sleep. I thought you were having a seizure," Sophie said, her eyes filling with worry as she patted a napkin on my forehead. It was only then I noticed I was sweating profusely. It was that strange dream again, only this time, it was so much worse. "I don't understand, but you're not at home," she said, and I shared the same worried look on her face. I'd explained what I'd saw in the dream to her, but Sophie couldn't understand me. I couldn't blame her either. If I were in her shoes, I wouldn't know what to make of it either. To conclude this upload, we're currently at the hotel and I'm in my room now, waiting for our other friends to arrive. I haven't fallen asleep since the nightmare, and to be honest, I'm afraid to do so. I know I'm away from the home, but I still feel like something bad would happen if I were to try to sleep. I just hope after all of this, I get to make another upload.
Subscribe today or beware.